Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting preview for this week's Zurich Classic. Gonna break down what to expect from TPC Louisiana and how to attack this wacky format that we have, where we've got best ball, alternate shot being mixed in to go out there and build your lineups and to go out there and select some of your top outright bets. So we'll start with the format, also a look at TPC Louisiana and how I'm modeling for this kind of week, and then afterwards gonna go a variety of different spots across the board. Top tier guys, elite tier players you might want to keep an eye on, some middle tier teams, even some value teams towards the bottom end of the board you might want to look for some outrights or over there for the DFS angle. So a lot to talk about here. It's a wacky one, a lot that I want to go through. Let's go ahead and get it started with a look at my modeling. Your modeling this week is probably a little bit overrated. So let's start right there. Anytime you have something like a team format going on, our typical shots gained analysis is not going to be as valuable. And I think that's why a lot of people out there are taking a break this week, right? Being a little bit more lazy about it, maybe throwing a few lineups in an outright bet, but that does not mean that it's impossible. Just because it's different does not mean you can't go out there and adjust what you're doing. And that is exactly what I've done for this given week. So we're going to circle back to this key stats section, but you'll see that I have everything modeled by group on here. So it's something that I tweeted out today, right? Pointing out how I'm doing it this week compared to other sites. And I think if you're not considering each grouping, that's pretty lazy analysis, right? I've seen a lot of projection sites out there that are just projecting players individually like they would for your any given event, and it's not that much of a leap to go out there, use that for each pairing, and that's exactly what I've done. So the point of that, of course, is to simplify our thought process, because if we're modeling each player individually and then having to just kind of figure out, right, how that would work together, that's going to be a tiresome process, right? Going through all the shots gained metrics, the form for every single player, and then having to do that for all 80 groups is something that I think would be a headache. It's something that I don't want to do, and I imagine a lot of you DFS players out there are in that same sort of boat. So on here, I've combined my total model ranking, my course fits, my recent form rankings to give you an idea of how the group is playing, right? So I do have the individual stuff down here. In fact, if you take a look at the shots gained page, I have everything there by team or over there by player. So you have the flexibility to look at either set of data, but the one that is a lot easier to use and the one that's probably a lot more valuable are all of these team numbers. So you can see on here, I have them sorted by team approach, team off the tee, you name it, over the last 24, last 12 rounds, all of that has been done for you. Event history, recent form over here is obviously done by player, but all of that is accounted for in my projections. So it took me a long time to go out there and, change the code for my modeling to go out there and account for having a two-player setup, a team setup, right, out there at this event, but we made it work, right? So if you're looking for an actual analysis on each of these groups, right, rather than just stuff for each player, make sure to check out my Patreon page, right? I know a lot of sites out there maybe being a little bit lazy this week, but you are not going to get that from Gsluke DFS. Let's talk about our key stats. So within each individual player, there are certain aspects that I'm looking for. So if I'm just looking at a player by themselves, they need to be a solid approach player, particularly with some of the longer irons. There are actually a lot of long holes around TPC Louisiana, and or with the putting. And I say or with the putting because this is a two-player setup, right? Part of the beauty of this golf course, of this event, is the alternate shot format. And if you're a group that has one really good putter, one really good iron player, well, every other hole you could foreseeably, right, be playing into each player's strength, and vice versa, right? If you end up having it the other way around, maybe it's the other set of holes where you're also getting that advantage. So while we'll look at all the stats for individual players, right? Again, I think putting and approach player by far your number one and number two key stats. It's also important, right, what you have from each player, right? Those complementary skill sets, and that's where the data is a lot less valuable. So we can take a look at some of the shots gained metrics, some of the just key stats that we're looking at out here. Comp course would be this QBE shootout, right? That's another one of these team kind of events, but it is by far less valuable this week than what we have for most. So if anything, I think birdie or better percentage is a really good metric to look at. I'm looking at it in like what is it, like 20% of my modeling this week, so quite heavy out there in the model. Off the tee is de-emphasized. I'm not really looking at around the green. It's like 5% in my modeling, and even the event history and the QBE shootout comp course that I'm using out there is a lot less important on this kind of week than what we have for most. So the modeling is helpful, right? I have all of that done, but what is much more important, right, are these team rankings, right? How they work off of each other. And the way that I've done this and how it's all set up over here are the players that get get a huge boost out there with their team ranking are ones that have spike performances in all 4 categories. So for example, if one guy's losing off the tee and the other's gaining off the tee, the team ranking far more weighs the one that's way up there, right? The one that's gaining a bunch of strokes than the one that's losing. So if you're kind of ham and egging it a little bit, right? You're somebody that has 2 categories where they're gaining, maybe it's off the tee and around the green. The other player's gaining on approach and with the putter. Those groups get a significant boost out there in my modeling. So when we take a look at some of the stuff on here, know that that's all baked into the projections, and I think how you can find a little bit of an edge. So let's talk about our play up top. First off, it's Patrick Cantlay and Xander Schauffele. Past winners at this event finished in 4th place here last year. So if you're looking for event history, you get it with both players. The only year that one of them missed the cut was Patrick Cantlay, and that's when they weren't playing together. Since then, they've gone T11, 1st, and then 4th place there last year. So clearly have an affinity for playing with each other, and it's not just this in this event, right? You've seen them at Ryder Cups or President's Cup absolutely dominate, and that's against the world's best competition out there, right? And the stage with some of the most pressure that you're going to see the entire year. So if there's any for sure prospect or for sure thing out there, right, it's this Cantler-Xander group, and it's 2 of the best players in the field, if not the best 2 players that we have in this entire field. So 11,200 I think is a fair price tag, and I'd almost treat them like a Scotty Scheffler, right? When you have 2 of those elite tier players playing together, that's going to help out a lot when it comes to alternate shot, and they have a lot of experience in alternate shot, right, from all those team events that they're playing, which is a key differentiator, right? Guys like Rory, Shane Lowry have played a few rounds together out there in those international formats. Xander and Cantlay have like 20-30 rounds together in this format, which is huge when it comes to playing under pressure. So I like them at plus 500 or better. Hard Rock doesn't have an outright board out yet as of right now, so I've been doing a little bit of line shopping, trying to find numbers that I'd take, and if you can get plus 500 or better, I would probably be a buyer on that grouping out there. So more so for DFS, I'm going to be using a ton of them no matter what out there, probably in the 40 to 50% range with my exposure. So ownership this week, it's worth noting, right? I'm going to be doing it by grouping because it does not matter which player that you're taking. So just like the format where it's 2 days of best ball, 2 days of alternate shot, it's a little bit different for building lineups. You can only use one grouping once. So if you use Patrick Cantlay or Xander Schauffele, right, you can't use the other. And the ownership, all of that, right, is going to show on Draftkings, right, just for each player, but no, like, effective ownership for the group is much more important, right, than if, let's say that Xander is like 5% owned and Cantlay is like 15% owned, right? We're much more worried about that 20% mark, right, than each player individually. So you have to think about it in groupings. The players on each team are going to get the same score. They also cost the same amount of money. So there's no examples out there where you can take a player and he's a little bit cheaper, right, than his counterpart. They have matched up all the salaries. They've matched up all the scores across both players. And that's how it works out there for DFS. So you essentially have to pick 6 groups to go out there and build a lineup out of the 80 that you have. So pricing goes from 11,200 the whole way down to 6,000. So I'd say a pretty typical slate when it comes to the DFS pricing, but you do have to think about it from the group perspective. So Cantlay and Xander, like I said, they're my favorite play because of the pedigree there, and also because they're just really balanced players, right? So in a few cases here, we're going to find groupings that have one extreme versus the other going on. This one is 4 categories for each guy that are all into the positive, right? So even if they had a weakness, the other one would have that into the positive. But when you have 2 players that are that well-rounded, I think that's why they excel so much from the alternate shot format. In the past, they've shot things like -6, -7 rounds out there for alt shot, which is pretty much unheard of around TPC Louisiana. So they've had some ceiling rounds there. I think they even threatened 59 once out there playing as an alternate shot. So that tells you just how comfortable they can be with each other. The next grouping we'll take here is going to be Tom Hoge and Mav McNeely, and this is much more what I'm looking for when I talk about complementary skill sets. So for this one, we'll go over to the shots gained metrics. In case you were wondering, Cantlay is not playing his best golf, but did finish in 3rd last week. So I think that's huge for his prospects going forward, right? Obviously, RBC Heritage is a good golf course for Cantlay, so it was good to see him bounce back there. So Xander, you guys know, is an absolute world killer, but when we go down here to Tom Hoge and McNeely, you're good to see what I mean by ham and egging it, right? So let's look at each category first off together. Let's look at the averages for each player, which looks pretty solid across the board. But then when we go category by category, you'll see why I think that they complement each other so well. So they're gaining off the tee, right, about 0.2 strokes. They're gaining on approach, about 0.6 strokes. Neutral around the green and gaining 0.4 strokes of the putter. Well, off the tee, it's almost all McNeely, right? He's gaining 0.6 strokes, while Hoagie's actually losing strokes off the tee. So, Hoagie, right, can struggle there, but McNeely's going to be setting him up nicely, right, out there for alternate shot. Out there with approach, Tom Hoagie, one of the best players on tour, the best player in this field when it comes to shots gained approach. McNeely losing in that category, right? So in the alternate shot format, right, if Tom Hoagie's going out there hitting the approaches, he's going to be in a much better spot to putt than what he's used to. And let's look at around the green. You'll see same thing, right? Hoagie losing, McNeely gaining, and then the putter for both of them has been a huge positive. But McNeely's one of the best putters on the PGA Tour, and in fact, of late, has not been putting as well as what he's used to seeing. So somebody like Mav McNeely, if he's going to be getting dart after dart from Tom Hoagie, I could see him just making all of those birdie putts from an alternate shot, let alone when you take a look at the best ball format, which, I mentioned alternate shot being important, especially like for, a Xander and Cantlay out there. But the best ball formats where all the Draftkings score is going to come in, right? So if you're playing out there, large field GBPs, even smaller field single entry stuff, we're much more worried about rounds 1 and 3 than what we are in rounds 2 and 4. Rounds 1 and 3 are where you're going to make 10, maybe 12 birdies on the round, or when you have that best ball, right, best score counting on every single hole. That is going to be huge out there for your ceiling rounds. So somebody like Tom Hoagie, McNeely, they check that birdie or better percentage box much more than everyone else. And that is one of my main key stats. And the reason for that is the best ball format, right? To go out there and make those 10 to 12 birdies, they've got to ham and egg it very well, and you've got to go out there and really get it done with the birdie percentage. It's something that I think people don't consider when it comes to the complementary skill sets is the best ball format, right? Everyone thinks about alternate shot, right? Setting up drives, who's going to hit the irons, so on and so forth. There's a lot of game theory involved when it comes to that, but they don't think about it with best ball, which I think it's even more important for best ball. And think about it this way, right? It's all about going out there trying to make birdies. If you have one guy that's good on positional holes, like a Tom Hoagie, for example, right, that'll just throw darts all day, is much more about the accuracy off the tee. That's great for like the shorter par 4s. That's great for the par 3s, right, to have that kind of player. Whereas a Mav McNeely is much longer, right, not as good with the irons, but on par 5s, right, some of the holes where you have to have that length, he has that, and also is a really good around the green player and putter, right? So can convert on a lot of those opportunities. So it's not just for alternate shot where the complementary skill set comes in, but also for being able to take advantage of certain types of holes around this golf course. And something that you'll notice about the Zurich Classic is that there's a lot of longer par 4s, like 470 to 500 yard par 4s. And then there's a lot of easy holes, right? Your par 5s and then sub 400 yard par 4s. So by having both types of players, I think that is massive for this given week, right? So that's why when I'm going through and I'm doing my analysis, I give a boost to groups that are doing it like this, right? Over their last 24 rounds, Hoagie and McNeely are getting the biggest boost possible, right? Because my modeling is looking at the stats that they're really excelling on, right? And that's 0.6 strokes off the tee. It's 1.3 strokes on approach. Around the green, it's 0.5 strokes for McNeely, and both are really good putters. That's why they're some of my favorite plays on the entire slate. So you can see I have them ranked as the number 3 ranked team out there, despite being number 7 in pricing. Up there with Xander and Xander and Cantlay, they're actually my number 2 ranked team. Number 1 is Rory and Shane Lowry. A lot of that because of their ball striking stats. But yeah, the eye test also has to check there. And Rory and Shane Lowry seem a little bit out of sorts. So that's why I went with these 2 groups as opposed to going with my number 1 course fit. But you can't go wrong with these sort of pairings, and I think they fit quite nicely. Something else to add here is that Tom Hoagie did win the QBE shootout, so he does have a lot of experience and a lot of success out there in this sort of format. In terms of the outright bet, I'm looking for plus 2,800 or better to go out there and fire on them, and hopefully I can find that by the time lock comes around on Hard Rock. Lastly, before we go into these pivot plays, so we've gone over a few core plays. We're going to go through a few pivots next, and then a few value plays towards the bottom. Let's go ahead and tell you guys about my Patreon page, right? So like I mentioned before, I'm very proud of all the analysis that we've done out here. And if you want access to it yourself, all these spreadsheets that you see throughout my videos, make sure to check out my Patreon page. There's a link down below in the description of the video. On there, I have the Golf DFS tier, which is how you get access to all of these. And I'm not just posting these for the main slate, right? I also go out there, post projections out there for every showdown slate, rounds 2 through 4. You'll get a full breakdown from me on what to expect. And all this analysis, all this research to go out there and do your own process, right? And again, the idea of me doing all of this by group is to save you time, right? To go through, make sure you don't have to go group by group looking at the shots gained metrics, because with 80 groups to go through, that is extremely tiring. So make sure to check that out if you're looking for all that behind the scenes coverage, for all that analysis yourself on there. I've got ownership posted, which will be done by group by the time that we get out there, right? So I'm not going to separate it by player. We got projected fantasy points, my player pool out there for my large field GPPs. I'm a 150 maxer, so I'm entering a lot of lineups. It'll give you an idea of where I'm putting my money this week, and all that modeling I was mentioning before. But now let's go into our pivot plays, which is something I've actually never done before out here for one of these videos. These are two groups in the middle of the pricing that I think are going to be overlooked because I'm expecting the studs and duds to be very popular, right? A lot of people to maybe take a Cantlay and Xander, go down here and try and take another 9K group, like perhaps Hoagie and McNeely, right, as their second man in, and to kind of skip this 8K range. So groups like a Hostler and Ryder, or down here a Berger and Perez, who we'll talk about just in a few minutes, I think are going to be severely overlooked. And in the case of a Hostler and a Ryder, they're one of those perfect groups when it comes to ham and egging it. So you'll see first off that Hostler's a gainer off the tee, right? Ryder's a loser. Hostler's a loser on approach. You have Sam Ryder gaining there. Same thing with the around the green and with the putter, both of them gained in that category. And while it's not like I want one guy to suck with the putter and one to be really good with it, having two players that can convert on their birdie opportunities is always going to be a positive. So if you think that this stat profile looks eerily similar to what we had with Hoagie and McNeely, you'd be exactly right? It's pretty much the same setup that we had just before. So if you're looking for a complementary skill set, you're getting at with both players. And though neither one's in the best of form, right? You can see in terms of a recent form ranking for the team, I have them at number 53 in the field. I'm willing to overlook that, right? These players are just in a down stretch. This sort of event has a lot of variance to it because it is that team format. And I'm much more willing to look at the upside of each player, which, even in a down stretch, Hostler, Ryder still make a shit ton of birdies. Their birdie or better percentage is still in the top 25 of this field in both cases. They have a lot of firepower out there for best ball. So love that at $8,600. And the added benefit, the reason why I can call them a pivot out here for this kind of slate, throat got me there, would be the fact that they're in bad form, right? They're going to be low owned. They're going to be probably sub 15% owned down here in the 8K range. So if you're looking to get different, it'd be a good way to go out there and do so. Another pivot, another low-owned team I think you can take, and also 50-1 on Hostler Ryder is a number that I'd be looking to get exposure to there. But Daniel Berger and Victor Perez are another group that I really think has a good skill set. Now, Daniel Berger has not been the best with the putter of late, so it's kind of hard to mention that he'd be an elite tier putter. But long-term, Daniel Berger is one of the better putters that we have out here. So once again, if we go through the key stats here, you'll see that Berger's a gainer off the tee, Perez a slight loser, Victor Perez one of the better iron players in the entire field. Daniel Berger pretty respectable himself there too. So kind of like the double putter, right? It's not a negative when both players are good in the category, but it is kind of good to see that ham and egg style, right? Because normally, right, if you're really good in one category, you usually are a little bit deficient in others. So that's why it's kind of good to see that. So around the green, we get that same kind of split. And then with the putter, Victor Perez has been very shaky this year. He's never really an elite tier putter, but Daniel Berger is usually a lot better than what we've seen. So you got to bet on them having a little bit of a positive regression with that flat stick for them to go out there and be a solid play. But even more so than what we're going to have with Hostler Ryder, I'm expecting this to be one of the lower owned groups out here in the 8K range. So probably even like sub 10% ownership. And at 65-1, we've seen crazier groups go out there and win, let alone a tour winner like Daniel Berger, somebody on the DP World Tour that was such a standout like we had with Victor Perez. Both are high pedigree players that, in my opinion, this should probably be like a 9K group when it comes to the pricing. But once again, because the form isn't as good as some of the other guys around him, he's going to be overlooked, right? He's not going to be a super chalky player, right? Like even a Davis Thompson Novak, I think are going to get more attention. I think a group like a Taylor Montgomery, Ben Griffin is going to get even more attention than what you have here. And I argue that they all have a pretty similar hit rate when it comes to DFS. And when you consider the skill sets that I'm looking for is why I think that there's some of the better plays in this range. So these pivots, again, not usually a part of these videos that I do, but I wanted to point out a few lower owned guys that you can take here in the middle that I think in general, this range is going to be slightly overlooked, right? Because of that lineup construction. And then when you add in the form, right, you're going to be getting two guys for a lot of leverage down there in the 8Ks. And now for our value plays, we'll start with this Eckroat Goddard group. And again, another combination at 65-1 that I'd bet outright that also has that complementary skill set. So if we go to the last 24 measured rounds, you'll get an idea. First off, Eckroat in a fantastic stretch of form, but Chris Goddard's really long off the tee. Eckroat's a little bit more of a plotter. So that's another way that you can kind of ham and egg it out there, right? You can be either really good or really bad off the tee, or be somebody that's more accurate versus a little bit longer. But the approach play, Goddard has been very inconsistent, but Eckroat's been on that torrid stretch of golf, right, gaining nearly a stroke per round there. So he's the clear alpha in that category. Around the green, he's also very stout around the green, whereas Chris Goddard's, not the best around the green player, I'd have to say. So that's another category where you're getting that. And then with the putter, Goddard's been a lot better in 2024 than what we're used to seeing, whereas that's been the one weakness of Austin Eckroat, right? So you've got the off the tee stuff going on. You've got the approach play that I think really plays into that advantage. And then the putter that hopefully Goddard can start to make some putts this week, because he would be making all of those short putts that Eckroat is setting up. I mean, Eckroat's going to be setting up just 5 to 10 footer after 5 to 10 footer. You have to think on the par 5s for best ball. Maybe Goddard can get after those par 5s, right? Trying to make some eagles there. This is the kind of group that I could see going off both for alternate shot and for the best ball format, which is why I like them so much out there for DFS. So another group that I'd consider for an outright, I think 65 to 1 is a pretty fair number out there in that pairing. And overall, just checks a lot of the boxes we're looking for, right? So in terms of individual projections, right, you can see Goddard's, right, kind of lacking out there. Obviously, Austin Eckroat's doing a lot of the heavy hitting. But in terms of the complementary skill sets, Goddard is a very unique player, right? Long off the tee, really good putter. And that is exactly what we're looking to plug with Austin Eckroat, right? Not always the best off the tee player, not the best putter, and you're getting that with Goddard. So I think this is a match made in heaven. This is one of the skill sets that I think fits the best for this kind of golf course. And at that kind of price tag is definitely somebody I'd get over the field on. And then lastly, our last play is down in the 6K range. And the 6K range is super gnarly this week. So no one that you're really going to feel good about down there. But at $6,900, this Hoey group is another one of those skill sets that really fits well. And neither one's in great form, like especially Justin Suh. He has not been good here in 2024, but we know he's capable of having top-end finishes. And let's take a look at the skill set, right? So we go down here to $6,900. You've got a Suh is not very good off the tee with Hoey. He's one of the best off the tee players on tour. He hits the ball an absolute mile. Justin Suh, maybe not the best ball striker, very inconsistent there, but has his weeks with the approach play. Hoey's been very good with the ball striking. In fact, both categories, right, would be borderline elite down here in this portion of the field. Around the green, neither one excels. So they're going to have to keep themselves in play, right? Neither one's very good at getting up and down. But Suh is an elite tier putter, whereas the big deficiency for Rico out there is going to be with the flat stick. So if you're setting up a bunch of birdie putts with Hoey going out there, right, hitting some darts, and then Suh's going out there and taking them home. On the more positional holes, right, Justin Suh making birdies with his wedges. Maybe on the par 5s, Rico's getting home in 2 and maybe making some eagles out there for that group. I could see this going well both for alternate shot and out there for the best ball format. So another one of the groups that I think gets a huge bonus out there in this kind of format. And they're definitely going to be low owned, right? So they could be a pivot if anything. I think the Eckroat Goddard group, right, it'll be like average ownership, maybe slightly above average when it comes to their ownership. Down here in the 6K range, no one's going to play Suh and Rico. So, I mean, if you took them in 7 to 10% of your lineups, you're probably getting leverage with that kind of exposure, let alone if you take them in like 15 to 20% like I do and take a little bit more of an aggressive stand. They're 150 to 1 on some books. If we can get that number, I'd be firing on them for an outright bet. But hopefully it gives you an idea of the exposure that I'm getting to, right? It's not just about the picks, the plays that I'm mentioning here, right? Obviously, I do that for the sake of entertainment, right? To give you guys an idea of some exposure, maybe to consider yourselves. But what's far more important, right, is the research that we're doing here, right? Going through, checking if, they're good in one category, bad in the other, right? And seeing if they can kind of ham and egg it a little bit. So that's what we've done with this analysis. Hopefully, if you're a part of the Patreon page, you've already been able to dig into this because I'm very proud of what I've done with the shots gained stuff this week. It took me a lot of time. I had to go through and do a lot of coding to go out there and make it compatible for the pairings format. But I think I've done a really good job with it, and it definitely made my life easier. And I think if you're out there, you're a member on Patreon page, it's going to make your life a lot easier too. So again, if you want access to this spreadsheet, all of this data that we just went through, go ahead, check it down in the description of the video. It's all out there for your disposal. Alrighty guys, that is all I've got for this week's DFS and betting preview. Before you hopping out of here, go ahead and smash that like button for me. And if you can get the outright winner for this week, right, go ahead and win a free month on my Patreon. The only caveat is that they have to be be a group that is at least 30 to 1 to go out there and qualify. But go ahead, give me your best guess down there in the comments and try and earn a free month of the Patreon page. Until next time, best of luck with all of your lineups, any outright bets that you guys might be going with this week. We're going to be doing our live stream Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So as per usual, feel free to go ahead and throw any questions that you have down there in the live chat. Let's go out there and have ourselves a week. Going to be doing some live golf content this week too, so stay tuned for all of that. I know this week, right, this format might not be for everyone, but a pretty big live event going on, right? I know Australia last year was absolutely hyped down there. We know that they have some pretty good players over there in live too. So if you're looking forward to that, stay tuned for all of that throughout the week and stay subscribed so you don't miss any of that when it goes live. So whether it's a video for live, whether it's that live stream on Wednesday, if you're subscribed, you won't miss any of that when it goes up there. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate the support here. Smash the like button if you haven't already. And I'll catch you guys for the content throughout the rest of the week.